This episode is brought to you by TikTok for Business. Are you ready to rizz up your brand? Well, you're in luck. TikTok is where discovery drives outcomes, and 3 in 4 users say they will buy from a brand they've seen on TikTok's platform. Learn more at tiktok.com/business.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Numbers Around the World, an eMarketer podcast made possible by TikTok. It's Monday, October the 28th. I'm your host, Bill Fisher, and it's my pleasure, as it always is, to welcome you all to Around the World. And this month, we're digging into our latest Global Media Intelligence Report. Welcome, folks, to a Behind the Numbers show that takes you all around the world, looking at what various countries are doing in the worlds of commerce, media, and advertising. Each month, we have our 3 in 3 news recap. Then we have the round table, where my guests and I have an open discussion about the theme for today's show, and we finish things off with my devilish recap stats quiz. Okay, so this month we will be looking at the 14th edition of the annual report that we affectionately refer to as GMI, more accurately the Global Media Intelligence Report, and we have some amazing experts that played the biggest roles in putting this together. Let's meet them right away. First up, we have GWI's Chief Research Officer, Jason Mander. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us again. Next up, she's eMarketer's Vice President of Research. It's Jenny Pearson. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for making your debut on the Around the World show. And finally, he's a regular on Around the World and author of the GMI. It's our principal analyst for Canada. It's Paul Briggs. Hey, Paul.
Hi, Bill. Good to be here.
Good to have you again. Okay, before we get into this, Jason, I wonder if you could just give us your really quick synopsis, an elevator pitch, if you will, of what the GMI actually is, what it's all about.
Sure. So GWI runs consumer research at scale. Each year we speak to millions of people across more than 50 countries, asking them a wide range of questions about their digital lives and lifestyles, everything from the devices they're using to the social media they're consuming. Once a year, we get together with the folks at eMarketer, as well as Publicis and Starcom, crunch the numbers that are needed for this report, which gives a quick overview snapshot of what people are doing across 49 of those countries. You can use it to see regional differences, how things are changing over time, and what the key stories are for media and ad campaigns.
Thanks very much. It's an amazing piece of research. Look forward to it coming out every year. Okay, we are going to get right into that in a minute, but before we do, let's have today's Culture Shock. This is where I take you to various countries around the world and give you some cultural facts or introduce you to some culturally specific norms. And we are in Finland this month, where small talk doesn't exist. Yes, apparently kids only learn this when they learn to speak English or another language where inane conversation about nothing in particular is a thing. One of the country's national sayings translates as "silence is golden, talking is silver," whatever that means. If you were to ask a Finn, "Hey, how are you?" you're going to get a full and very factual response because they're going to take it as a serious question. So be prepared. It could take some time. And I should add, this was all verified by our resident Finn, Jasmine Emberg. She's our social media supremo. I didn't believe it, so I wanted to check. And she swears this is true. Anyone want to engage in some small talk about this? No. Good. We've all got Finnish blood in us. Excellent. That's exactly the way I like it. Superb. Couldn't have scripted that any better. Okay. Anyway, it's time for our 3 in 3 segment now. Now, this usually involves me introducing 3 news stories, one to each guest, and we cover each one in a minute. But this time out, given it's a very special edition of the show, I'm going to give each of my guests 1 minute to introduce their most interesting takeaway from this year's GMI. So I'm going to give each guest 1 minute of time. And Paul, I'm going to ask you to go first as the most tenured person on this podcast. So my timer is set to a minute. What have you got for us?
Yeah, so I think, we covered this in the global report, but the lead takeaway from my point of view is the fact that we've reached peak media. So what does that mean? It really means that across a variety of formats and devices, the time spent with those devices and those activities has kind of reached a ceiling. In fact, what we saw In 2023, it seemed to be a peak, and then we saw a little bit of a clawback in 2024's data. So nothing too drastic, but a little bit of a clawback. So that idea of a ceiling being reached, I think, is one we cover in great detail in this report.
Very good, and well within the minute. I like that as well. Okay, Jenny, I'm going to reset the timer for you. You have 1 minute. What's your main takeaway?
My main takeaway is a new data set that we were gifted from GWI about watching influencer videos and vlogs. That's a new question in this year's report, and one that I think shows some really great and interesting data. My favorite data point is that over 50% of those in the Philippines have watched an influencer video or vlog in the past 7 days. That is above and beyond higher than any other country in this data set. Also far and above the regional average for some, like North America is about 18% as a regional average, just for context here. Latin America is always pretty high. For this data point, it's 26%. So a big outlier in the Philippines, so interesting. But then I'm looking forward to digging into that further as we talk more here.
So am I. Thanks for that. And bang on a minute. Well done. And finally, resetting the timer for you, Jason. 1 minute. What's your key take?
There's so many things I could choose from, but I'm going to make it personal. I looked at the time spent data for Western Europe because I am a Brit, and it tells me that in the last 5 years, on a typical day, people are spending 38 minutes more per day on mobile than they used to. Put that another way, across a typical year, I would be spending an extra 13,870 minutes on my mobile, which is about 231 hours. And also, according to the data, 60 of those additional hours would be on social media. And I have to say, based on my own Instagram and TikTok habits, that rings very true.
A man after my own heart. I'm a TikTok addict. Happy to admit it. Okay, fantastic. Well, that wraps up our 3 in 3 for this month. Now it's time for the main part of the show, what we call the round table. So this is where we dig a little bit deeper into the reports. We'll build on some of the highlights we've just heard about. We might talk about a few other interesting tidbits as well. But let's start at the top. Paul, you introduced this idea of time spent hitting something of a ceiling. You gave us your sort of really top level take. What's driving this, and why is this the story this year and it wasn't in previous years?
Yeah, I think a few things are happening. We did see, a few years ago, there was sort of a pandemic bump in digital media time and media time overall as people spent more times in their home. Over the last few years, we've seen that come down to sort of pre-pandemic norms. I think we're at a point now where increased variety of options is a real factor. So they might fragment their time across more activities and more devices. And I think that's also a dynamic that we're seeing in the data. But overall, I think, and the only format that really didn't move, that was pretty flat year over year on a global basis, was mobile time. So we see that as sort of probably in a sort of at a ceiling, probably won't gain too much or lose too much in the years ahead. But with most others, I think it's sort of reached that kind of that near ceiling or a little bit past the ceiling. And now we're seeing a bit of a decline. I think it's people choosing to turn away from devices in a lot of cases as well, to choose something that's more traditional, like going for a walk or walking the dog or what have you. So that was a key takeaway that we saw in terms of the time spent figures in the GMI this year.
But interesting you talk about mobile time coming down, because it sounds like, Jason, in Great Britain, the opposite is happening. Why is that?
Well, I was looking over 5 years. It's true that between last year and this, in not all countries have we seen mobile going up. In some, it has actually fallen. There are still some countries where it's climbing. I guess I agree with Paul that the types of gains we used to see for mobile, where every year it was pushing up really significantly, are probably gone. And now it would be much more modest growth or stability. I mean, after all, there are only so many hours in the day, and a lot of those hours are already taken up with devices, so it can't grow too much more.
And in terms of devices, I think there was another sort of general finding in your global roundup, Paul, about smart TV ownership being up this year as well. Is that an interesting trend worth digging into?
Yeah, so I think one key part of the data set is ownership metrics across a range of devices, including everything from VR headsets to gaming consoles, et cetera, smartphones. And one of those key devices is smart TVs. So the majority of smart TVs that are shipped around the world, or TVs that are shipped around the world these days, come with built-in internet connectivity. So that fact is leading to greater adoption around the world. So in every region except Latin America, we saw growth in smart TV ownership, pushing north of 50%. In Latin America is the world leader. It's north of 60%, and it declined slightly last year, but it is a leader by such a margin that it's not really alarming. So we're just seeing that have big implications, because easy access to the internet on the biggest screen in the home allows much more easy consumption of streaming services, of things like YouTube and other apps on your TV that weren't available when TVs were dumb.
Is that in any way influencing this influencer vlogger uptake that you spoke about, Jenny, or is that across all screens still?
Yeah, that's across all screens, but I do think those are correlated for sure. I think a lot of the influencer content is accessed through YouTube, and it could be on a smart TV, but also on many other devices. So it is, as Paul noted, really fragmented. But then, yes, I think that influencer videos are kind of ubiquitous within the YouTube platform, within other social sites. So it's second nature that it's part of smart TV also.
Is there a link between, I don't know if we can ascertain this from the data, is there a link between online time spent and social media adoption? Because this seems to be more and more influential, social media, right?
Yeah, so I think so the three main buckets of data, just a little bit of a background. Time spent with a given media is one. Device ownership, which we've covered, is another one. And then it's adoption of certain types of media. So you mentioned, so social media and messaging has an adoption rate based on the number of services that people use. So that is very much something that we can correlate to time spent as well. And we do see relationships between the amount of adoption of a certain type of activity and the time people spend with it.
And also some really interesting regional differences in adoption and that time spent. But I don't know if we want to get into that right now.
I think we should, if we could. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. I honed in on so interesting in Latin America, just the number of increased time spent on socials, but also the number of messaging services and social sites used were just so much higher than other regions. I don't know, Paul or Jason, you saw that in your research as well.
Yeah, I mean, globally, it's now 10%. So 1 in 10 of the people that we speak to that are using 11 or more different social media or messaging services, which is kind of mind-blowing. And when you think about the cumulative time on each, you can start to understand how people are spending 1, 2 or more hours per day. It does vary regionally. That can be influenced by the services that are available, but also how culturally ingrained certain activities have become. So things like social commerce, much more ingrained within messaging and social apps in Asia, for example. The age profile of populations can also have an influence. That helps to explain why LATAM is often so far ahead. Generally speaking, it's millennials who are urban and high income who are using the highest number of messaging or social services.
Yeah, you mentioned that age breakout and how important the median age of a population is and how that influences the type of behaviors they exhibit. The other piece of information that we pulled into this year's look at the data was International Monetary Fund per capita, GDP per capita data, so sort of the relative wealth of countries. And we did see a correlation between, especially in that device ownership category, the relative wealth of a country and its propensity to be high, have a high ownership rate of those nice to have digital devices. So we tried to pull in a variety of data, not only sort of median age, but also relative wealth of countries to kind of add, a lens to what's behind the data.
Yeah, it makes total sense when you look at the breakdown of the countries, right? So it's places like US, Spain, Italy, Norway, UK that are the most likely to own those smart, slightly nice to have devices. It's in parts of Asia in particular where we see the other end of the spectrum where ownership is lowest. If I can fly the flag for the UK for a second, we are the top country in the world for tablets, smart TVs, games consoles, smart home products, and smartwatches. So there we go.
Wow. Always happy for you to fly the flag for the UK.
Another key point that we should mention here, and we do this every year on this podcast and in the written report, is the US number for TV consumption is so much higher than the global average. And it just speaks, even, relative to a neighboring country like Canada, it's like an hour more per day spending time with TV in the US than it would be in Canada. And that gap, especially you compare that US number of TV consumption to other regions, that gap even gets even larger. So it's a finding that we see every year. It speaks to the variety of content that's available to US consumers. And you know what? We're also seeing that trend happen in online streaming of content as well. So Americans love their content and they'll go to their TV or their computer or phone to get it.
Yeah. I just want to come back to the Philippines for a minute, because just remind me, Jenny, the Philippines has the highest uptake of people following vloggers or something. Is that right?
Right. Watching influencer videos or vlogs in the past week. Right.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff interests me. Have we seen other countries sort of following, or is Philippines a real outlier?
I would say for this particular activity, this is an outlier, although relatively high also in Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, seeing high viewing influencer videos. And that could be, to Jason's point earlier, a younger audience, and then also just so ingrained in kind of the consumption habits, whether it's mostly on a device in this case, in those regions. It's also relatively high in Latin America. We also have younger audiences or skew younger in those regions as well. So it does kind of go hand in hand with that audience.
Okay, lots of really interesting stuff here. I love hearing about the GMI. I love doing this podcast every year. This year's no different. Clients should definitely download this thing when it goes live on the 30th of the month, just in time for Halloween. But it's time now to move on to my favourite bit of the show. It's the Recap Stats Quiz. This month, I've delved into the GMI rankings, and I've used those to put together 3 multi-choice questions for my 3 guests. They're going to go head-to-head. There's no prize, I'm afraid. Stuart has refused the budget again. So it's bragging rights only, but it's all in good fun. And I don't expect you to get these right. I picked the most obscure questions. But anyway, let's see how we go. Okay, we are in Japan first, where just 37% of people listen to radio. That's the lowest proportion of all 49 countries that were tracked. The first radio broadcast in Japan happened on March the 22nd, 1925. Which of the following statements is false? A. March the 22nd is now Broadcasting Memorial Day in Japan. B. At the time, radio was referred to as wireless telephone listening. Or C. The first radio broadcast was a radio drama called Tanko no Naka, which translates as In a Coal Mine. So which of these facts is false? Broadcasting Memorial Day, wireless telephone listening, or the radio drama In a Coal Mine? Okay, we've got answers from Jenny and Paul. Jason, what are you going to give me?
C was so specific, it's a weird one to make up. So on that basis, I'm going to say B.
You're going to go for B. Okay, interesting. We've got different answers from each of you. If you'd have said March 21st is now Broadcasting Memorial Day, you'd have been wrong, because it is. It's not a public holiday or anything, but it is known as Broadcasting Memorial Day in Japan. Radio was originally called wireless telephone listening as well, interestingly. And if you search up the first broadcast in Japan, it sounds like a guy who is speaking to somebody on a telephone who's hard of hearing. Just look that up. It is quite interesting. So the correct answer is C. The first broadcast was not a drama called Tanko no Naka. However, it was the first ever radio drama to be broadcast in Japan. It just happened a little bit later on August the 13th that year.
Oh my God.
So let me just...
That was the tough one.
That was hard, wasn't it? Yeah, I know. They don't get any easier. Okay, so we have an early leader, and it's Paul Briggs. How does that feel, Paul?
It feels good. I'm usually not in this position, so. But you know what? Regarding that answer, you know what? When it comes to this stuff, I think content drives a lot of behavior. So I thought maybe that was kind of why I gravitated towards that one.
Good logic. Well done. Okay, question 2. And we're in Portugal next, where 96% watch live TV. That's the largest proportion of anywhere in the world. They might watch more of it in the US, but in terms of the user base, it's highest in Portugal. But what is the longest running TV show in the country? We have A, Telejornal. We have B, Programa Silvio Santos. Apologising for my accent here, it's terrible. Or C, Telediario. Telejornal.
I thought you'd give us a description of each.
I'll give you a description. Nice. When I give the answers, I'll give you the description.
Okay.
So we got A, Telejornal, B, Programa Silvio Santos, or C, Telediario. What do you think, Jason?
I'm not pronouncing those again, so I'm just going to plump for A.
A. Okay. And that's what you said, Paul. Okay, the answers are in. If you'd said C, Telediario, you'd have been incorrect. This is Spain's flagship newscast. It's been running since 1957, and it's the longest running of the 3 that I mentioned. B, Programa Silvio Santos, is also incorrect. This is the longest running TV show hosted by the same person. It's Brazilian, and it's been running since 1963, and it's still going. So well done, Silvio Santos. The correct answer is Telejornal. This is Portugal's flagship newscast. It's been running since the 18th of October 1959, so a couple of years after Spain's Telediario. Okay, so we had 2 people get that right, but Paul is maintaining his lead because he was correct. He is currently leading with 2. Jason catching up on 1. Jenny yet to get off the mark, but we have another question. Let's see how you do with this one. Finally, we're in India, where 16% of the population use 11 or more digital services. I think you mentioned in the main section there, Jason. This is ahead of everyone else around the world. That 16% obviously likely has some pretty good disposable income, and given the price of digital services in India, it's no surprise that they subscribe and use so many. For example, a Netflix subscription in India costs how much? This was as of February this year for a basic package that isn't ad supported, according to Visual Capitalist. And your options are, they're all in US dollars, $5.98, $3.38, or $2.82. How much does a Netflix subscription in India cost? A, $5.98, B, $3.38, or C, $2.82. Okay, Jenny and Paul's answers are in. What are you going to go for, Jason?
Straight down the middle, B, $3.38.
Okay, the answers are in. If you'd have said $2.82, you would have been incorrect. That's the cheapest in the world, and it's next door in Pakistan. $3.38 is also incorrect. This is the price in Turkey. It's the cheapest subscription outside the Indo-Asia Pacific region. The correct answer is $5.98. And pretty cheap when you compare that with Switzerland, the most expensive, where it's $21.48. Ouch. And of course, in the US, it's $15.49.
Are we talking with ads?
Without ads.
Without ads.
Without ads, yeah. Okay, totting up the scores. Well done, Jenny. You did get off the mark. Jason just unable to reel Paul in at the end there. So we do have a winner. And the winner of my quiz this week is Paul. Well done, Paul. Fantastic.
Yay.
Yeah, great. My first victory, I think.
Absolutely superb. I always have a tie break just in case of a tie. Should we have the tie break question?
Why not?
Why not? So the tie break is open-ended. It's a number. I'm just looking for a number. You can just shout out the numbers for this. So we heard that Japan has the lowest number of radio listeners, but these listeners also spend the least amount of time listening. So among the population, what does the average, or how long, does the average person in Japan spend listening to the radio each day in minutes?
34.
I'll say 45.
I'll go less, 20.
I've got to do some maths. It's okay. It's easy maths. Jenny got that right. So you can have a moral victory there. It's actually 26 minutes. So you were very close. You can win the tie break. Paul wins the quiz proper. Sorry, Jason. You don't win anything, but you're a great competitor.
Bill, it's good that you brought that up because it brings to my attention, or I recall now that when looking at Japan, their time spent with media was way lower than a lot of countries in the world. And even their adoption of activities were much lower. It's a unique country in that respect in terms of media behaviors. So this question at the end was a good underlining of that point.
Good. Glad to hear it. I like to think that my questions have some use. Okay, well, unfortunately, it is time to end today's show. It was a really good show, and we end with a winner, or 2 winners, 3 winners. You're all winners. So congratulations, all of you. Jason, thank you very much for joining us from GWI. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks. Pleasure as always.
Jenny, thank you very much for your superb debut on Around the World.
Thank you.
And Paul, thanks as ever, and congratulations for winning, I think, your first quiz ever.
Thanks a lot.
And thanks to all of you for listening in today to Around the World, an eMarketer podcast made possible by TikTok. Tune in tomorrow for The Daily Show, hosted by Marcus. If you want to ask us any questions, you can, of course, email us at podcast@emarketer.com. I hope to see all of you next month for another edition of Behind the Numbers Around the World, where there will be no small talk, just big, juicy, real talk. Bye for now.
On November 1st, eMarketer is hosting a virtual summit. You can learn all about the top trends of 2025 with a keynote from analysts Sarah Marzano and Evelyn Mitchell-Wolfe, panels hosted by analysts Kelsey Voss and Yuri Wormser, and featuring executives from top brands. All of this starts at 11:30 a.m. Eastern on November 1st and is hosted by eMarketer's Vice President of Content, Susie David Canyon, and Senior Director of Client Briefings, Jeremy Goldman. Use the link in the show notes to register today.